What's happening with West Coast Swing today? Is it even swing dancing anymore? Are the changes happening to the dance for the best, or are they damaging the dance we love? Today, we have a conversation with dance historian Forrest Outman. Forrest has spent the last 15 years researching, collaborating, interviewing, and collecting information from other leading researchers. His work has garnered him prominence in the field of dance history. Today, he shares his perspective on music, dancing, and culture to give us some context on the past, present, and future of West Coast Swing. Enjoy this awesome interview with Mr. Forrest Outman. So first of all, it's great to catch up with you. Thank you for doing this. It's awesome. I love the blue hair. Funny note, I have also had blue hair at one point in my life, so I dig it. So I guess to set this up, we've got a bunch of topics to cover: some music, some historical figures, history of the name of West Coast Swing, and I guess the big one that I've been getting a lot of questions of is like, what the heck is going on with swing today? And you're the man to add some like historical perspective of dance forms like changing over the years, probably better than anyone I know. So can you first give us like a brief overview like of who you are and what you do with this dance history thing?
Sure. Well, I'm a social dance historian. I shouldn't necessarily say social dance. A ballroom dance historian is what I usually say. And let me codify that or state first that the term ballroom is misunderstood. Ballroom means partnered form. So if you did a Charleston and you were looking at a dance document from the 20s, they would say Charleston, and it meant solo, and they would say the ballroom Charleston, and that meant the partner dance form.
Oh, dropping knowledge right
That's
off the
why
bat.
Latin dances like the mambo are in a ballroom book, right? Because they're a partner dance form.
So
Whereas you wouldn't have a ballroom book that's a tap dance that has tap dancing or ballet in it.
Gotcha.
So I study partner dance history. I specifically focus on American-based innovations. However, I do, in the course of that, of course, dances international, like, say, the mambo, traces back to Cuba. So I study all over from African dance to Afro-Caribbean-based evolutions to African-American. You name it, pretty much I have to know it all.
That's super fun. So this being West Coast Swing Online, the focus of today is West Coast Swing.
Yes.
Yeah. So, the big question we're getting is like that there's been a bit major change, probably due to the advent of the internet and musical stuff. So like, give me a short overview of like the major shifts you've seen in like West Coast Swing over the last, you can pick it, 10 years, 5 years, 15 years, 20 years. Like, what's the major shift that...
Those are great increments you just stated, 5, 10, 15, 20, because it's about 5 years that it takes before you can really see what's happening. It's like a child growing. If he's around you all the time, you don't notice they grow. But then somebody sees them a few months later and they're like, oh my gosh, Jimmy or Cindy, they got so much bigger, right?
Right. You
don't notice it because you're part of it. It's when people go away and come back, they're like, wow, this is different. So about 5 years is the time frame that people that are in the bubble realize it's changing. Yeah, and then at 10 years, it becomes more obvious. The further you extrapolate that, the more change is significant.
Gotcha. So we're watching this in little 5-year increments.
Yeah, it's gonna be noticeable, very noticeable by that time. Until then, it's little changes you don't notice.
And what drives, and I don't want to set this up, but like what drives a difference? Like, where does music fit into this?
Ooh, wow. Okay, that's a big jump. I'm going to back off just a little bit, and I will come back to it. I promise to put a pin in it and come back in just a second. Gotcha. Because first thing, the drive there's twofold. Yes, you mentioned music, huge. Obviously, the music you're dancing to changes your dancing, and changes in music as far as what's being put out in contemporary culture changes things as well. So we're not in control of that either. But the other side of it is competition, and even on a personal level, we all have our own backgrounds and our own idiosyncrasies and preferences and biases. And those are what makes you, you. And all of us bring that to the table, whether we realize it or not. And you're always going to have each generation that's going to be slightly different. Their viewpoint's different. Their culture has changed a little bit each generation. They're coming in with new biases, right? New experiences, new viewpoints on things, and that's going to inspire them in different ways than the previous generation. So that's going to be something you can't stop. It's like trying to hold back a wave.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. It's going to flood right over.
And music is really just one component of that.
Music is one component. You can't take away the social and cultural aspects of dynamic change, because that happens in every single area of art and life.
Fascinating. So, like, okay, that kind of covers it, right? There's a lot of different things. So, what are the main elements? There's music, there's social situations. What are them? If you
Okay,
gave me like,
so
I know you hate boxes. For those of you guys
yeah,
watching, what's
well,
brilliant about
everything's
Forrest?
very gray and kind of flows, yes, rather than it being this straight and narrow. History's a mess.
I think in
So
bullet points, and you do not, but that's why you're the historian.
yeah, bullet points usually miss all the things around it, but
Right.
I'll try to make this really succinct here. Essentially, we have to deal with the fact that, so if I were to take one example, in the end of the disco era, discos, most of them rebranded into what we call nightclubs, right? And then a large amount of them became country and western clubs because it was the newest trend. So the club owners like, oh, we got to make some money. We're just going to rebrand this now as a country and western club. And that's why disco and hustle are so meshed into country and western culture. You wouldn't guess that, but it's true, because disco clubs became country and western clubs almost overnight. John Travolta, after he did Saturday Night Live, the next big film he did was what, Urban Cowboy?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, there's
And
the shift.
I literally talked to somebody who was a dance teacher in the 70s into the 80s last night. He still dances, still teaching. And he said the exact same thing. I didn't prompt him at all. He said it verbatim, almost like that. I was like, wow, that is exactly on point.
So, and
Because he was there.
what time frame is this?
That's, right around 1981 or so, we see this mass shift happening. But that's just an example of how society and social trends change things. So it's not one of those things that really I can be in control of. It's more along the lines of nobody sat down and made that happen. That was something outside. I mean, that was a cultural change, right? So it wasn't the dance teachers. It wasn't the social dances that changed that. It was, in fact, the
kid who wanted to be like John Travolta, and now John Travolta's wearing a cowboy hat.
Right. And whatever's cool is cool, And that's the current trend. So that's something that's just going to be.
So when we talk about trends, right, the old school guard, we like to hold to what we know, right? And so everyone says, well, it's West Coast swing. It's not West Coast swing anymore. So like, what happens to a dance? And we'll talk about the good and the bad, like that doesn't hold to its roots. Let me start with a better question. Like, what's the advantage to a dance holding to its roots? And then what's the disadvantage?
Okay, great. Well, the good thing about holding something to its roots is you can preserve something in that sense. I view that as a preservationist mindset. You're trying to encapsulate a time and a place. Yes? So you can preserve that. And that's good in the sense that if we don't preserve it, the knowledge is lost. I run across this endlessly. We have lost far more than we have retained in history.
For sure.
So the good news is that by keeping something alive and still doing it, we don't lose some of those ideas and skill sets. And also the music of the era as well is not foreign. Yes?
Yeah, fascinating. Like you set me straight on I call it the game of telephone, right? Like by the time I start West Coast swing, I don't really know the difference between a push break and a sugar push. It's just a sugar push to me, but explain that one. Just as an example of the game of telephone, how, I'm carrying on something that I didn't even know was incorrect.
Well, it's not really incorrect. It's just that you don't understand what's behind it. And that's to be expected. Just to say that, like a sugar push, I think I first dawned on me in, hold on a second, I'll go grab a book.
Oh, that's the way it is. Yeah, so those of you guys who are watching, Forrest and I sat down and did a pretty extensive hour-long interview. So if you want to kind of cover the sugar push and some of that other stuff.
I've got a wall of books on the other side of this camera. So here is Betty White's teenage dance book, 1950s book. And in it, she does a push break, but there's no sugar footing in it. She explains a sugar foot separately, which is exactly how it went. A sugar foot is we call swivels a lot in Lindy culture. Right. swiveling. So when you take a swivel or a sugar foot and you add it to a push brake, you are doing a sugar push.
But that's a classic example. Without that historical understanding, someone like me and my generation just starts calling it a sugar push, but it's historically incorrect. But now it's kind of, dare I say, correct, or at least normal.
Right. Well, it's just, a sugar foot is what swivels are, if you will. So we can add that in or not put that in as far as a characterization or styling. But yeah, so there's just tons and tons of examples of that. Or one of the ones that I thought I would explain maybe today was, I think I mentioned this before, like coaster steps. We'll get into that. Maybe how that's misunderstood. I endlessly deal with that. Just there's a lot of terminology that people misunderstand, but also another side of it that is misunderstood is flows. Music and innovation change, but with it come new ideas, and these new ideas and innovations bring with them different ways of moving or expressing yourself. And for me, that's the intoxicating part of history, is it gives me new tools or a new way to see that I never saw before. It's like it opens the mind, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's all of these possibilities, but I never saw them because we're told right and wrong, and we put things in this box, like you said.
Yep. So that's one of my questions was like, what happens to a dance that's lost its way? But in your example, staying tight to what we know is current now, you lose all of the previous expressions.
Correct, exactly. So there's so many examples of this. Like I was talking to Robert Royston the other day. Cheers, Robert.
Hello, Mr. Robert.
Another great fan of history, and he knows full well the innovations that were brought from Texas with the push and whip stylings from Texas that brought a lot of complex wraps and spins and such into the dance as well. And those dancers changed West Coast. You can see that in, say, great examples are the early, when you started looking at the U.S. Opens in the 80s. If you guys want to get a really good understanding of the history of West Coast swing in a pretty easy way, you could just go year by year through the U.S. Opens from 1984 on, and you'll start to see that change.
I don't know where I came across this video. It's probably back in 2003, and it has to exist somewhere. But somewhere, someone had compiled all of the U.S. Open winners in one straight video. And it was really fascinating to watch maybe where I thought changes happened, and then to watch like the winning couple, and then all of a sudden there'd be a major shift and it would never go back. Everyone would look like this and there'd be a change and it would never go back, and it was different until the next change.
Yes, actually you can buy the like the 20-year anniversary edition of the US Open, which has, I think from 83 on, they have like box sets, if you will, that show the winners essentially only for the US Open instead of all the competitions and such. It just shows, I believe, like the classic division winners and the showcase division winners or something.
That's probably what I came across.
That's what you want to do, is watch that video. It's a little pricey, like $80, but definitely worth it if you really want to understand the evolution of it in a visual way.
I'm going to try to find that and link that up in this video at some point. I just made myself a note. So like what's an example of a dance that's lost its way, like negatively? It's art, so it's subjective to say negatively, but kind of going off that argument that if we don't pay attention to the roots, like, is there a particular dance that stands out, or is there just a general example?
Yeah, an example for me is again, actually going back to the conversation I had last night with another pro about hustle. I love hustle, but the hustle that I love, and a lot of people from the actual disco era, is different. One of the things that happened is pretty much the people that have kept hustle alive were the people that were the pros making money off of it, and within the places that had large city subcultures to support it. Outside of that, everyone else went on to different areas to make money, and of course the dance was no longer cool socially, so it wasn't being done. A lot of people switched to other subcultures, like we discussed with country and western, essentially building up at that point, and they jumped ship to other styles. That's understandable. But what we lost along the way was there were many forms of hustle. And hustle wasn't this linear dance per se. That was only done pretty much in New York as in this like slotted manner. And even in New York, it was done within kind of a certain clique of the top people in the city. There were many other styles that were done, and some of them are really cool, and people just aren't aware of them.
And they just got lost because they weren't.
There weren't people out there actively teaching
Right.
it anymore.
Right.
It wasn't in the public light. So unfortunately, if we don't have that information out there, how is somebody going to know it? That's why I don't get upset when people don't know anything. I mean, it's frustrating, but at the same time, I wouldn't expect anybody to know any better, because how would they?
This is off topic a little bit, but interesting because I need to sick you on this story. There's a dance in this town called the Rat Race. And it's, I don't know if you know anything about this. There's a group of rat racers that are all, I think the young ones are probably now in their 70s and the older ones are in their 90s. So there are these dances in Germantown and Louisville, Kentucky, and a couple of neighborhoods where this group of people have been dancing together for probably 50 plus years. And they've kept together this form of dance that they call rat race that's mythical, and it's like the Loch Ness Monster. I've heard of it. I've sort of met people that have seen it. And the one time that there was one of my friends got invited to one of the old timers dance, I sent him with my camera and he came back. He says, I got this video footage. And the video footage literally came out blurry and you couldn't see anything. It was literally like a...
Good news there is film. Peter Loggins, another dance historian out there, happens to be a big fan of rat racing. I think he just, maybe a few days ago, a week ago at most, he just posted up some video again about rat racing that he had filmed or shared anyway. And so it's out there, it's documented, you can see it.
That's fascinating.
And essentially, if you watch it, it's just foxtrot. They're just doing a shuffle bass or sliding steps in a foxtrot.
So being more specific back to West Coast Swing, like what is the best thing in your historical perspective that has happened to West Coast Swing? What's the cool thing that's evolved that didn't exist before?
I mean, in say current culture or over the years?
No, current culture, like kind of toggling back before everything else previous to what we have and what we have now. Like what's the innovations and evolution that's positive that...
Okay, for me, I actually like the influence that began with Zouk being brought into the dance, in that it brought in legato-based movement or fluid movement and expression that was a bit more intimate, rather than it being everything from out there and about syncopation and flashiness and spins, complex footwork and such. Now, if you watch, sometimes I just sit on the sidelines and just watch dancing and try to tune out the sound. Sometimes, a lot of times I watch videos without sound on because I just want to analyze the motion and what it expresses. And then maybe I turn the sound on afterwards. Because what I'm seeing is you people are, of course, because they're dancing to this really fluid music. A lot of it's pop music today is using that syncopation with that 2/4 structure with a 4/4 that's prevalent within music from Brazil. Mm-hmm. And we would think of it as samba and maybe in studio culture. But it's smooth. It's much smoother because it's based on the Zouk music evolution that happened from the French Antilles. Sorry, I'm ranting a little bit, but it's smoothed out the music now. And now we have body rhythm as a focus in the dance, a lot of undulation. We have head rolling actions and things brought into it. We have a lot more held positions in the dance now, I see. Yeah. Instead of having complex spin and rap patterns and such, and a footwork base.
So that's interesting because, like going off the I'm gonna say it, I can be this guy, the grumpy old timers who say it's not swing anymore. But like, if we only held true to our roots, the West Coast Swing would never have the intimacy that it has now. Which is, which as you said that, I never quite realized that, but that's a huge difference. If you know, 20 years ago, it was not a very intimate dance. It was a very technical dance, and difficult dance, but not a particularly intimate dance. But that's a humongous
right, because the swing was always a fun dance, right? It was a fun dance, maybe flirty. That'd be the edge.
Right,
flirty,
right.
But definitely not sexy. That was a later innovation. When you see the dance becoming more sexy, and then it's gotten to be more sensual now, even. That's definitely a new thing.
So going back to your point, like what we can learn from the past to like re-innovate. If you walk into West Coast Swing 2 years ago, right, and you've only experienced this as an intimate dance, what can you look back to? What periods, maybe even what dancers or music that would allow someone who's only been exposed to West Coast Swing currently for the last, say, 2 years? Like
Okay.
what cool innovations from the past would they look to kind of find new tips and tricks and approaches that don't follow the current intimate culture?
I'm going to pull something up here. Maybe I can play this real quick. And you can put a link maybe to this as well. Let's see what we got here. Just a second here. And I'm going to pull up a great example, I think, of something that we could learn from. Okay, here we go. And this is from the 1990 US Open. It's not in the competition. This is people social dancing afterwards. So
fun.
Right? I think you can learn more from this than you probably could from the competition footage, honestly. Let me see. So here we go. All right, so this particular footage, though, what you're going to see is you're going to see different couples and different styles coming out and dancing to the same music in an endless stream. So you'll see everything from stuff that you would recognize as West Coast Swing to Lindy Hop to Balboa, all fused all together to one song. And notice it's actual swing music from the swing era they're dancing to. So you won't hear this at a West Coast Swing dance anymore. So that's definitely something that has changed. You're going to see people doing aerials there with people that are doing West Coast Swing in the same jam to the same music. We've definitely lost that. Now people all the time say, oh, I do West Coast. I don't do Lindy. I do East Coast. I don't do West Coast. All these little caveats that we've made up essentially and put ourselves in these our boxes that have no point. They serve no purpose.
And what's the famous, is it Dean Collins quote, "It's all swing"?
Yes.
It's all swing.
That is a fantastic quote. In fact, I thought I'll pull that one up if I can here.
So
that's my favorites.
To the new people, that's, we've kind of picked on the old timers and holding tight to what they know. But for the new people, it's all swing. So don't hate on the other styles, even if Brian B doesn't dance any Lindy Hop.
Yeah, I believe it. Here we go. Yeah, I actually have. This is from May of 1977. This quote. Let me see. I'll just read this verbatim.
Yeah, do it.
There you go, folks. It's the document there, so you can see it.
Yep.
All right. So, 50 years ago, a shy, retiring young man called Charles Lindbergh made world and everlasting history by being the first man ever to fly solo nonstop across the Atlantic Ocean. New York to Paris, the legendary Lucky Lindy was born that day and has endured unblemished and untarnished through all the years. However, because Lucky Lindy's feet, another memorable event occurred. Named after this great young American, the Lindy Hop dance came into being, albeit somewhat lessened in expertise. Gotta love that. If not almost completely buried by Johnny-come-latelys with an avalanche of unknowledgeable changes and under a host of topical pseudonyms. Nevertheless, despite that fact, Lindy Hop has gone through a number of name changes, such as Jitterbug, the New Yorker, Swing, and of course the ridiculous misnomer, East and West Coast Swing, which some alleged teachers and others still propound. It is still the Lindy Hop. And further, there is no such thing as Eastern or Western or West Coast Swing. The sooner current swing dancers recognize it, and the sooner those teaching it teach it the right way, the much sooner will swing once again attain its rightful place in the dance world. Dean Collins.
Whoa! So you can just hold tight to say that if you don't like innovation, we don't even sit here today having this conversation about West Coast Swing. Like if you hold tight to the old school, that's fat, and that's the kind of old school argument, right? Like it's not what it used to be, but like you said, it's never going back in the box.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating.
Right, and also the implication as well, though, that I think underscoring that is that we don't have to have the labels as much either. Instead, I can just say I like to dance to modern music, or sometimes I like to dance to to more vintage music, or I like to dance to up tempo, or I like to dance to smoother music or whatever, and that inspires and changes the dance expression. You can't literally do the same movements that you can do on a super slow song and on a fast song. It won't work.
Right.
So absolutely. Mechanically, changes have to happen. So even the ability to dance to faster tempo music, people will lose if they don't dance to it. You don't use it, you lose it.
Right. And you wisely, I was going to put you on the spot to make you give me some people that we should emulate from the past. But I think in lieu of that, in lieu of putting you on the spot, I'll try to get a hold of that video that you sent, and we can, or that you just showed, and kind of link that up as some different things to emulate. So for those of you guys who are watching this, we'll try to add some resources, so I don't have to put you on the spot and name names to people.
Sure. Right. So a fun one for me is you can find a little clip of Dean Collins just before he passed away, dancing to Michael Jackson's music on streetswing.com, I believe, Sonny Watson's page. And that's cool because here you're seeing somebody from the swing era who brought really Lindy to California and taught most of the people that then spread it around, at least in a complex form, I should say.
Yep.
But yet you can see him dancing to modern music as well. So here's a pure dancer, if you will, from New York in the 30s that came here, and you can see him dancing in the early 80s to Michael Jackson.
That's awesome. And for those of you guys who are watching this, when we previously talked, we kind of covered the whole Dean Collins coming across. So if those of you guys interested, we'll link up our first chat that covers that a little bit more detail. So on that, shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about the name West Coast Swing. Like, where do you currently track the name to in your history? Because I've come across some cool stuff that you posted, and then I had to update on the site. So where did the name West Coast Swing, Western Swing, West Coast Swing, where did that?
I can't remember the ad exec that is responsible at the top of my head right now. I didn't pull that one up, though I could probably pull it up now. Essentially, it was originally the term Eastern and Western Swing were used. I think I actually printed that out for you, though. See, yeah, cool. So this is, yeah, I mean,
no BS,
I try to provide documents for everything.
Yep.
So here we go. Go ahead, bro.
Can't argue with you, because you'll show me a piece of paper that.
I'm fallible. I'm always correcting myself.
I did say that. I said where your history currently tracks back.
That is so true. Ask me another year from now, I'll probably say something different. So here hopefully you can see that. It says Swing July 1950. I highlighted it. Oh, there you go.
Gotcha.
So this is, and if I go to the front page of it, it says right here, Sophisticated Swing. This is the first Arthur Murray syllabi to include swing. And it was partly written by Lorraine Hale, who is a dance director in Southern California. And in that, you start to see the language being developed. See, basic throw out right here, it refers to it as formerly Eastern Freshman Break.
Ah, okay. So
what they're describing is the differences in terminology. See, this one says double underarm turn, and here it says Western underarm pass and roll.
Okay.
This is where they're referring to movement biases in different regions, because prior to this syllabi, each area dance teacher was responsible for teaching what was being done in their area. So whatever style was prevalent in your community is what you taught.
Right.
Instead of a national syllabi. Because Arthur Murray became more like a nationally syndicated as a franchise in '46 following Fred Astaire. And then what happened at that point was that then they started having to develop syllabi to hand out to have it so that it was standardized throughout all of the franchises.
Right.
And that was in '46, but the '46 curriculum doesn't have swing in it. I've got the 46, the 48, 49, 50 stuff. I've got all this stuff up to this point here from Lance Benishek, a fellow historian. Kudos to him.
Cool.
And I would say that at this point, though, this is where you start to see them trying to describe the differences between them and that language. But then if we skip forward to the next curriculum, which is this one. Okay, this is Arthur Murray's Dance Notebook from 1957. And this one is by Lorraine Hale. I don't know if you can see it or not, but that's Lorraine Hale's name right there. Cool. And it says on the bottom of there, June of 1957. And in here, it has West Coast, if you will. But at the time, they didn't have the term West Coast. They had the term Western swing.
Okay.
So now what we're getting into is when it starts to be changed, right? And here, if we go almost immediately, I think the second page in here. Oh, I have to see. No. I'm going to skip around here. Boop, boop, boop. Never mind, it's a few pages. Fourth page in, you can see slotting.
Okay.
So at this point now, they've got the slot. They're saying this is Western swing now. It is no longer round anymore. That wasn't in the 1950s. That was by 57. Through those few years is when the real change happened, and it kind of tightened up into this standardized form, if you will.
So like 50 to 57, it's changing, and by 57, they start to actually document the change and standardize it a little bit more.
Exactly. It becomes a dance, if you will, separate.
And the magic question, where have you currently found the first mention of West Coast swing? I think I saw a couple pictures maybe on your site or maybe something you posted.
I don't know if this is the first one in my collection, but it's one I posted up here. This is 1957, Casper, Wyoming.
Yep, I saw that.
West Coast swing right there.
Yeah.
Okay, I also have one from Hawaii in 1957, West Coast swing being taught as well. So I think that almost immediately some people, started changing the language there because of the confusion with Western swing being a genre of music that would be what we consider maybe rockabilly today.
Right.
So it was like rock and roll, country fusion, right? Western style swing music. Yeah. So there was a little bit of confusion there. So the consensus was maybe we should call it West Coast instead of Western.
Yep.
Then it wouldn't be as confusing. Go ahead.
And we'll circle back around to the Western and West Coast, Eastern swing and Western swing. Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk like real quick. What was because actually I'll read. I had a chat with Skippy earlier this year about
awesome.
And so we're talking about West Coast swing, and
here's your book.
And there you go. Just gonna take it back. And about the name change, and I don't want to dig into that quite yet, but the proposed online name change. But this is what Skippy said in her words about West Coast swing changing names, because it goes back to your Eastern and Western swing and the final branch to West Coast swing. But Skippy said West Coast swing has a historic presence starting in the 1950s. It had a reason to be called Western swing because Arthur Murray's had their East Coast swing was known as Eastern swing. West Coast swing became West Coast swing, which really made sense because it was developed in California in the West. Several years later, Eastern swing became Western swing. This completed the picture. West Coast swing has a classic sound and has earned its place in the history of swing dancing. That was her official on-the-record reply. I won't say the colorful thing she said off the record. But
save those for me for later.
Yeah. So what is, and in chatting with her, obviously, like West Coast swing is dear to her heart, but it's inevitable. We've already talked about West Coast swing evolving out of Lindy Hop and through the years. Like, at what point does a dance earn a new name? Like, at what point is that like okay? Because the current argument, by the old timers is a little bit what Skippy said. It's earned its place, but at some point it evolves to something else. And like historically using other dances as a guide, like at what point does it kind of become appropriate?
Okay, great. For me, dance is a nonverbal language. So if we use that as the way that we communicate to another person using our body, when someone no longer can understand your language, you're speaking a different language. Now, I can speak to somebody from England and we can understand each other.
Right.
We both speak English. We might have different dialects.
Sure.
Somebody, again, in New York or Jersey or maybe Texas or wherever has a different dialect, right? But we can still understand each other. It's when it evolves to the point that the language becomes muddled and you can no longer communicate, that now we have to train ourselves separately to understand that. That's, to me, when we have to view it as really a different thing.
And is it fair to say that we're getting closer to that?
I would say that is the case, because that's the argument I think that really a lot of people that have been around for a while are making, is that it is changed to the point that the younger generation, say, doesn't dance to the blues music that West Coast evolved to, and doesn't dance to like jump blues and things anymore, or even swing music anymore. That a lot of times now they're dancing to current pop music, which isn't swung and such, and they're dancing to these very, very slow music comparatively,
right.
And they're losing that ability. Many people can't dance at 180 beats per minute.
Yeah. I had
the same as one could say it's not true the other way around.
Right. It's interesting you said that about losing the ability, because I had I don't go to many despite running West Coast Swing online, we're so busy doing what we do that I don't go to a lot of West Coast Swing events anymore. And so I had I danced with a pretty notable top name pro, a newer one at that, and I remember coming off the floor and feeling terrified because I didn't know what dance we were doing, right? Because I have a bad back, and all of the leverage D moves and the bendy and all that and the intimacy, like that's not the West Coast Swing that I learned. And I literally remember coming off thinking to myself, I don't know what dance we're doing. I can't find any of the keys that are ingrained in me, a little bit old school style. And I mean, the people clapped and they thought it was great but it was terrifying. It was literally I didn't have the language to speak during the dance, Despite having a pretty broad dance vocabulary, I was struggling. So it's interesting that that's kind of a metric that it might be nearing the point where it might need to change.
Yeah, I don't mind the name as much, but as far as people using different names, they always have. Before it was Western swing, it was sophisticated swing,
right.
Or smooth swing. You see that in early documents as well. Because the music, say, sophisticated swing is a song, and really it refers, and actually here I got a great quote here from Arthur Murray. This is from 1942. I went ahead and printed this up real big here. All right, so it says, the rise of more sophisticated swing music has revised jitterbugging, which has been streamlined into something the better hotel ballrooms and Army morale officers are willing to sanction. Arthur Murray, dance teacher.
Huh.
So sophisticated swing, if you will, changed, though, because of the music. And you find that in the early documents by dance teachers talking about it, that where they're dancing to different music. They're dancing to blues music. They're dancing to this new smooth style of swing music, right? And that informed the dance, because you don't hop to a song that doesn't have a bounce to it.
Right.
Or is slower and registered, doesn't have the energy. I also went ahead just to so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about here. This is, again, from streetswing.com. A great clip from the Arthur Murray School of Dancing. This is from, let's see if I can pull that up there. Hopefully you can see.
Yep.
But here, you can get a clip or a link to this maybe.
Swing. It looks fun, doesn't it? It is fun. And you'd enjoy trying it yourself. You're never too old to learn. And the exercise will do you good.
So here you can see the stuff that was being taught by Arthur Murray, the stuff we call Western swing.
Even if you've never danced a step before.
Wow.
And you'd enjoy your lesson so much.
Yeah, so very clearly you can see that hybridization, that divide between Lindy and what we would think of as West Coast swing today.
Right.
Use of these six-count patterns, push breaks, smoothed out, so it falls right in line with what they were teaching.
It will place you under no obligation.
Yes.
And you're really
So that's a great example for me if you want to see early West Coast swing and the differences between that and say what they were dancing in the upper registers in the 30s.
And what year was that from? That clip?
I think it's 1960.
Wow. So at that point, there was a clear change. Like that's West Coast swing as we would that I would recognize.
Yes, I think
Clearly.
many people would recognize that today. Yes.
That's super fascinating. So like, what are some, I know this is a really broad question and I'm going to make you think in bullet points, but like, who are some key figures that helped shape the dance, from Dean Collins, who we talked about, so you can cover him a little bit. Any key figures in any way, like whether it's as top dancers, as teachers, as people who added to the community, music, anything.
I couldn't possibly do justice to that question.
I knew you.
That would be a long diatribe. So I'm going to say that there are key players in the dance. Say maybe like you mentioned, say Skippy Blair. Skippy Blair's contribution to the dance is, if you will, for keeping it alive in a way, and really pushing the dance and teaching teachers. Yes, passing it down. So she, deserves a lot of credit for that. People that she impacted would be one of her teachers, her early instructors, was Buddy Schwimmer, whom you might not know. You would know, but a lot of people in today's culture would know, but they would know his son, Benji.
Right. Yep.
So you could say that's at the third generation hand-me-down from the people that started the dance to Buddy to Benji.
That's fascinating. And for those of you guys who want to know more about Skippy, I shared some stuff that she shared with us. We have a little Skippy blog series that I'll link up to in the bottom. Fascinating stuff. She has you'd probably dig it. She has in her house like what today we would call a blog, but for her it's papers, that were updated. So she has a whole bookshelf full of her papers from all across the years. So that might be something to dig into someday.
It's fantastic. Yes.
Yeah, I've had plans on a couple of occasions to go out and spend a week to go through it. It's been fascinating. There's so many. Just you can't replace. I asked her. I said, when did you start dancing? And she said, I can't remember a time that I didn't dance. She remembered dancing in front of the lights of her mother's car, and she always thought that she danced in a different life. Anyway, she's just a fascinating figure. Anyone else comes to mind? Or let's do this. Let me put you on the spot. So we kind of talked to the old school, like in the new school. So if you're West Coast swing dancing today, you've been dancing 2 years, you're super excited, all the cool kids. Whose influence are you looking at?
I think that in any generation, especially in the modern era, let me say in the modern era, because we live in an era where people travel. So people fly to all these events and competitions. And we also live in the YouTube generation now, where we have the ability, like right now, to be able to transfer information globally. And that's changed dancing a lot. So people now, I feel that a lot of times competition drives dancing.
Yep.
It is the vehicle by which people judge dancing or level to which they try to acclimate, to rise to. And so the people at the top of the competitive structures are the ones that are really leading the charge in the innovation, because by them winning, essentially, people are accepting. Right, they're accepting this is what one should aspire to.
I want to cover that because when we chatted, your historical perspective gives me perspective to what's gone on in the 20-something years that I've been dancing. So going back, I guess, over a decade now, I remember someone bringing me a clip and saying, hey, Jordan and Tatiana just came back from Brazil, and they learned this dance called Zouk. It's the first time I'd heard this, maybe mid-2000s, 2006-ish, give or take a year. And so years later, I bought the Zouk syllabus, and we learned it, and I realized that a lot of the cool Jordan and Tatiana moves that everyone was emulating from the internet were really actually basic Zouk figures and shapes and things like that. And so that was the first time through our conversation that I went, oh, there's a historical influence that I watched go on underneath my nose, and I didn't really realize what it was. I thought
that happens all the time because people aren't cross-trained in a lot of different systems. Right. So you don't spot it. You don't have an eye for it.
Right.
But if you have an eye for it, if you've cross-trained in a lot of styles, you can see these things. And you just go, oh, so you're taking an element from this dance, you put it there, and oh, look, you took this element from her there and you put it in there.
Super cool. Yeah. So to kind of close up, like what are the, again, talking to the new school and the old school, right? The people who want this to stay the same and the people who are entrenched in the current culture, like what are the takeaways for the old school guard to understand about the progression of a dance? Like what are the things that they need to understand about the progression and why that's okay?
Because for a dance to live, it needs to be vital to the current generation. They have to feel like they have a say. You know, no one wants to feel like they're held down or their opinions and their feelings aren't important. So, or that they can't dance to the way they want to dance to the music that they like. So good luck trying to tell youth that they can't do that. It's never worked out before, probably won't ever work out.
Beautiful.
So instead, I find that I think that if you embrace the culture and instead share with them what you can and explain to them why it's rich and why it can be important to them, rather than it being a you've done wrong, put you down, you can't do that kind of thing. Rather a, hey, check out this thing that we used to do. You guys don't do it anymore. You probably think it's cool, yada, yada. You know, show them what they can gain from the other forms rather than take away their toys.
That's amazing. Well, that kind of covered the last question, which was like, what can the new school, like how does a smart, let's call it young person in the current generation, like how do they look backwards if someone's watching this and they're on their own and they don't have a particular teacher to influence them? How do they look back on the history of West Coast swing to kind of garner what you said earlier, like some of the techniques and approaches and things that have been lost? How can they like rediscover some of those tools or discover them for the first time? Like how does someone go about that relative to West Coast swing if you're, you know, a 2-year dancer now?
Okay. Well, again, talk to the more experienced dancers, talk to the earlier guard of dancers, and look to old video or talk to somebody like myself or what have you for resources to be able to do that. There's not a one-stop shop out there, unfortunately, for that type of information yet. Maybe one day. But what we can do, though, is you can look to people, say, like the Mario Rabaus, the Robert Roystons, people that have been doing it for a while, the Marianne Nunez's, who
She's
are
timeless. Like for me personally, like to watch her back in her early career and today, she's like got this timeless approach. There's an interesting one that I think has always looked amazing no matter when you saw her across time.
Mm-hmm. Right, and she trained with Dean Collins for her first U.S. Open. You know, it's straight up a Lindy.
That's crazy.
And then you can see the change. You watch her now and you go, oh, she's a West Coaster. But yeah, I can pull shag dancing with her.
Yeah. She's amazing.
I've done it. I fooled you. Started with West Coast, switched over, Lindy into shag.
And with a partner that spoke the language.
Yes. So that's an example, though, of where we can learn some things there. Is to start looking back and reclaiming some of the things that are lost. And I personally find that, again, that's really rich because it gives you a different perspective. You don't need to have somebody spoon feed you innovation. No one ever did. You know, the people that made up all these dances and innovations, they saw something and they took from here and they took from there, just like everyone does today. It's just a lot of times we're waiting for who's the authority to do it for us.
Yeah.
You don't need permission. I give you permission, everyone. Go. Do what you want. It's awesome. And just put it within the context of a language that people can understand.
That's awesome. And to kind of close up, that's kind of, for those of you guys watching this, you know, we're going to talk about you and what you're doing. But that's kind of my goal for West Coast Swing Online, right? It's certainly not to be an authority. I try to just curate and collect ideas for people to use, especially people who don't have access to a good teacher or historical perspective or even a dance partner in some cases. Like that's the goal of my, you know, journey for West Coast Swing Online, is just to provide resources and information for people to use as they need. So for those guys who are watching this, this is by no means the authority of West Coast Swing. It's just hopefully the biggest porthole to communicate different stuff, like from people like you. So how do people get in touch with you? Because you do some awesome things, and a lot of people don't know who you are, and I think that's crazy because you're a super treasure.
Okay, so you can follow me on Facebook, Forrest Outman. Just look up my name, Forrest Outman, on OUTMAN, Forrest, FORREST. Get me on Facebook. I post stuff all the time with history articles there and such, little snippets. I also write for American Dancer magazine, which is available online digitally. So you can see articles I've written on history. I have a blog, dancehistory.com, or dancehistorian.com. And as far as my work goes, I don't publish nearly as much as I should. I right now have been for years now, honestly, I've been just amassing a massive collection of information. I travel pretty regularly across the country to archives and copy as much as I can, essentially, to preserve and to accumulate information to fill in the historical record. So a lot of things I know are not out there. And so feel free to contact me. People send me emails, messages, calls all the time. I'd be happy to help anybody out.
Awesome, brother. Well, thank you so much for doing this. It was a blast. Thanks for taking the time.
No problem. Nice to see you again, Brian.
Yep, you bet. All right. Well. Man, I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I did. Forrest is a fascinating guy with a lot of knowledge. If you noticed, he can talk really deeply and historically about a lot of different aspects of dancing in general, and of course West Coast Swing. If you guys want the previous interview we did with Forrest, where we kind of talked about the origins of West Coast Swing and how it came across and from Lindy Hop and Dean Collins and some of the major influences in the dance over the years, you can head down in the comments section below and I will link up that interview. Also, if you want to join our mailing list, we have a Move of the Week club where we send out bi-weekly emails with really cool resources, videos like this, teaching tips, West Coast Swing patterns. We call it the Move of the Week because we send out a move just about every week. Again, I'll link that up below. Also, any of the other video resources that we discussed in the video that are not included in the video as you watch it, we'll link those up below. So thanks for the support, gang. Here at West Coast Swing Online, we're just super passionate about sharing West Coast Swing information with all of you guys. So please give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, share this video with your friends, head on over to West Coast Swing Online and check out the blog and the video section. There's lots of cool resources for you guys there. Thanks for the support, gang, and we will see you again in the next video.